All right, let's get right into it. Today we're talking about a skill that's an absolute game changer, assertive professionalism. Now, this isn't about being a jerk or being difficult, not at all. It's about being incredibly effective. Think of this as your personal playbook for taking back control of your work.
I mean, you know the feeling, right? You walk into a meeting, you've got this great plan, everything's laid out, and somehow you walk out with 3 brand new projects, a deadline that suddenly moved up, and this sinking feeling that you've completely lost the plot. We have all been there, and man, is it frustrating. And look, these things, they aren't just little annoyances. We're talking about scope creep. You know, those last minute, hey, can you just requests, and expectations that seem to change with the wind. These are the silent killers of your productivity, your team's morale, and at the end of the day, your results. They just inject chaos right where you need clarity the most.
So, what's the antidote to all this chaos? Well, it's what we're calling assertive professionalism. And here's the most important part. This is not some personality trait you either have or you don't. Nope, it is a skill. It's a discipline you can learn, and it's built on 3 solid pillars: using data, sticking to the process, and being super clear in your communication. Let's break down exactly how you can do it. Okay, section 1. Anchor in facts, not feelings. And this one is the absolute foundation. You've got to anchor every single one of your positions in facts, not feelings, not opinions. Why? Because opinions can be argued all day long, but objective evidence, that's a different story. This is all about changing the conversation from, well, I think, to, here's what the data shows. Just look at the difference here. The weak response to something like, our competitors are faster, is to get defensive, right? To argue. But the assertive response? It's to bring out the validated data. You pull up a benchmarking spreadsheet or a client satisfaction numbers. You're not getting into an argument. You're just laying out the cold, hard facts. See the shift? It's huge. And here is a perfect example of how this works in the real world. Someone comes to you asking for more work. Now, the old way might be to just say, oh, we're totally swamped. But the assertive way? You say, let's take a look. And you pull up the workload heat map that proves your teams are already at 90% capacity. It's not personal, it's not emotional, it's just a factual statement of reality. The conversation instantly changes from, are you willing to do this, to, what is our actual capacity? So what's in your data-driven toolkit? Well, think of it as your arsenal of truth. We're talking about time-stamped emails, risk logs showing compliance penalties, executive briefs, those capacity charts we just mentioned, and even the nitty-gritty of contract clauses. Every single one of these is a tool you can use to build a position that is just unshakable. All right, pillar number 2, always defend the process. If facts are the foundation of your house, then process is the framework, it's the structure. And I want to be clear, we're not talking about bureaucracy for the sake of it. These agreed upon workflows, they're your guardrails. They keep things fair, predictable, and they make sure everyone's accountable. Oh, the dreaded hallway agreement. We've all been ambushed by this. You know, that quick chat by the coffee machine that somehow turns into a new commitment? The weak response is just to say, okay. But the assertive response? You redirect. You politely say, hey, that's a really interesting idea. Can you please submit that through the formal change control process so we can evaluate it properly? You're not being difficult. You're just defending the system everyone agreed to. And this is such a powerful move. When someone tries to make a decision in a random chat thread or some ad hoc call, you become the guardian of the process. You calmly reiterate, hey, just a reminder, authority for this decision resides with the steering committee. You're protecting not just yourself, but the entire project from the chaos that comes from those back-channel decisions.
And there's a super simple 4-step way to do this every time. Step 1, reference the official document, like the project charter. Step 2, redirect their request to the right channel, maybe an intake form. Step 3, if it's a big deal, propose a formal meeting with all the actual decision makers. And step 4, this is key, document everything in a shared decision register so it's all out in the open. Simple, clean, effective.
Okay, on to our third and final pillar. Protect time and resources. This is all about guarding your most precious assets, your team's time and the project's budget. And let's be honest, this is how you handle that never-ending flood of, can we just, requests without going crazy. So, here's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you say no without actually saying the word no? Because nobody wants to be that person, the one who always shuts ideas down. But saying yes to everything is a one-way ticket to burnout and failure. So, what's the secret?
It's actually pretty simple. You make the trade-offs crystal clear. You don't become the roadblock. The reality of having limited time, money, and people, that's the roadblock. You just make it visible.
This table nails it. Let's walk through it. Someone asks for faster delivery. You say, absolutely, we can explore that. To do it, we'll either need an incremental budget or we'll need to reduce the scope. Which would you prefer? See, you've turned their request into a choice. They want new features. You say, okay, let's document the trade-offs. What gets deprioritized to make room for this? It puts the decision right back in their court where it belongs.
And here's the bottom line, folks. A thank you is nice. A pat on the back is great, but it doesn't write code or analyze data. Being an assertive professional means you calmly clarify that new work requires real resources, not just good vibes or vague promises. It's nothing personal, it's just project physics.
Okay, let's bring this all home. A lot of people worry that being assertive is going to create conflict or friction. But here's the twist. When you do it the right way, using data, following the process, the exact opposite happens. You actually end up building a much deeper and more lasting trust with your colleagues.
So many people think that if you're assertive, you're just being an obstructionist. But the reality? You're actually demonstrating that you are reliable. You're showing that you're a good steward of the company's time and money. You literally become the person they know they can count on precisely because you refuse to let things go off the rails. And this quote just says it all. Firmness anchors trust in our stewardship. Your firmness isn't about being rigid for no reason. It's about being the stable, reliable anchor in the storm. When people know you'll hold the line, respectfully but consistently, they learn to trust you. Your yes actually means something.
So here it is, your playbook in a nutshell. 1. Anchor everything in data. 2. Uphold the process, always. 3. Make the trade-offs totally explicit. And do all of this with a calm, steady confidence. And please remember this one thing above all else. Clarity is kindness. Being clear is the kindest thing you can do for your team, for your stakeholders, and for the project itself.
And that's our playbook. But really, this isn't the end. It's the beginning. The only thing that matters now is putting this into action. So I want you to think about it right now. What is one boundary you will assert tomorrow using these ideas? What's one conversation where you'll bring data instead of opinion? Because that's the moment this stops being just an idea and starts changing your work for the better.
Today, we're focusing on a skill that is, let's just say it's non-negotiable for effective leadership. Assertive professionalism.
Right.
We're moving way beyond just being nice and, getting along. We're focusing squarely on using these very precise, data-driven English phrases to manage some really complex, high-stakes business meetings.
And the mission from our listeners for this deep dive was so crisp. They need that quick, thorough knowledge on how to sound confident, professional, and just absolutely unwavering when they're setting boundaries. Whether that's protecting a timeline, a budget, or even a key team member's time. This isn't about being aggressive, right? It's about using language for ultimate clarity and decisive follow-through.
Yeah, and the sources we've pulled together for this aren't theoretical. They really function as a strategic playbook. It's built from watching these highly coordinated professionals in action. So we're breaking it all down into these actionable conversation plans for everything. Difficult vendor negotiations, rigorous scope protection, you name it.
And we've kind of coined this approach assertive professionalism, but powered by data-driven boundary management.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to extract and really analyze the specific, repeatable business English phrases and the strategies that let you control the meeting narrative, protect those vital corporate resources, and enforce governance.
And all while maintaining that professional composure. That's the part that anchors trust.
Yes.
We really want to show you how every firm statement you make isn't just, an opinion you hold. It's an anchor. And it's tied to something verifiable, a signed contract, a compliance dashboard, a risk log that everyone's already agreed on.
So that external data is what takes the emotional sting out of any internal pushback.
It completely removes it.
Okay, let's unpack this. So we're kicking off where most professional boundaries get tested first, which is the meeting structure itself. Oh, for sure. If you lose control of that agenda in the first 5 minutes, you're already fighting an uphill battle for the rest of the hour.
Right. The first core mission, our source material stresses, is about aligning what you're delivering with contractual timelines. And this is the critical part, locking in those commitments immediately.
So you stop the team from relitigating things that have already been decided.
You absolutely have to prevent that. That upfront clarity, it's the foundation of any kind of efficiency. I mean, think of it like defensive driving, but for meetings.
I like that.
If you let people question old assumptions mid-flow, you're just opening the door to, emotional arguments and these massive time sinks. The sources give us some really excellent, concise phrases to preemptively set this boundary.
Okay, so you need to establish the scope of the discussion right away. The first line of defense is what? A clear, objective constraint.
Yeah, you just say it. The agenda stays focused on aligning deliverables with contractual timelines today. It's simple. That immediately frames the whole discussion as being about execution and accountability.
Not about brainstorming or debating.
No, not at all. And this has to be supported by an expectation that people came prepared. The assertive professional makes sure that the conversation is anchored in facts that everyone should already know.
So you open by saying something like,
I'll open by confirming everyone reviewed the prep deck so our discussions stay anchored on solid ground. It sets a really high bar for participation. It politely, but very firmly, tells anyone who hasn't prepared that they're going to be catching up, not driving the conversation.
okay, but what if someone does try? What if they try to relitigate a decision that was already finalized in, I don't know, a previous steering committee meeting? How do you pivot firmly without sounding like you're just dismissing them?
Well, the pivot has to reference that preceding authority. You just remind the team of the current goal. You could say, I need to remind the group we're here to lock commitments from the Q4 plan, not reopen assumptions that were already settled in the last governance review.
That is decisive, because you're appealing to a higher authority. The Q4 plan, the review, not your own opinion.
Exactly. It's not about you. It's about the plan.
That is powerful. And what if a stakeholder tries to, take the conversation sideways? Maybe they bring up a new unrelated feature or a budget concern that's not on the agenda. The source material seems to insist you need a formal procedure for that, not just a soft no.
You do. And that brings us right to the strategy for managing scope creep and detours. This is so common, especially when you have peripheral groups, maybe from procurement or a marketing team, who try to expand the scope in the middle of a meeting.
So the strategy is to flag it immediately.
Flag it and formally park it for later.
And the specific language around this is what turns like a vague suggestion into a managed visible action item. You're basically transforming a potential derailment into a follow-up process.
Yes, and the language is key. I will capture that point in the parking lot register and clarify the required decision makers and resource allocation before we adjourn. The meeting leader owns the note, they own the action, and they dictate the follow-up. It's all controlled.
What I find really strategic is what happens when people question the priorities that are forcing you to be so focused. You never respond with, because I think we should, right?
Never. You respond with the corporate mandate. The sources advise pointing directly to the executive brief that reinforces timeline discipline for the quarter. Or maybe you reference the board minutes that prioritize this specific project.
And crucially, you have to link that focus to potential consequences. The ultimate assertive move seems to be referencing the risk log that highlights penalties tied to missed compliance milestones.
That's it. When you tie scope creep or a missed deadline directly to financial penalties and, potential regulatory breaches, the debate it transforms. It's no longer about someone's convenience. It's about corporate liability.
What's fascinating here is how the data just acts as this neutral third party in the room.
It does.
Yeah.
By referencing a shared risk log, you stop the discussion being me versus you. It becomes us versus the risk of non-compliance. And that is the absolute core of data-driven boundary management.
Let's talk about one of the most common challenges, handling both dominance and silence. So you have one person who is monopolizing all the airtime. How do you execute that, gentle surgical interruption without alienating them?
The strategy is to use the agenda as your shield. You wait for a natural pause, or you can slightly interrupt by just referencing the clock or the next item on the agenda.
So you could say something like,
An interruption followed by a redirect, for example. That's a valuable perspective, John, and thank you for the detail. In the interest of time and ensuring we hit our decision checkpoint on integration testing, let's now hear from the QA lead.
so you interrupt, but you lead with a compliment, and then you immediately redirect based on the shared, predefined structure. It becomes procedural, not personal.
Exactly. And the co-lead, or the host, has to provide support here. They should immediately cement that transition. They can summarize efficiently. To echo that, the key takeaway from the integration discussion is X. Now, Sarah, can you quickly outline the financial implications of that decision point?
Right. Keep the momentum moving toward closure.
You have to.
But on the flip side, silence can be just as damaging. especially when it follows a really crucial point, like a big financial commitment. You ask if everyone's aligned and you just get quiet nodding. You can't let those vague reassurances pass.
You absolutely cannot. The strategy here is to use data as an interrogation tool. The leader has to prepare these probing prompts that reference a shared dashboard.
Give me an example.
You might say something like, before we approve the Q3 spend, looking at the dashboard, I see regional deployment is lagging by 15%. Mark, specifically, what is the critical path constraint tied to that lag, and how does this financial approval mitigate that specific gap?
Ooh, that forces a specific, quantifiable answer. It prevents anyone from just defaulting to that vague, oh, we'll catch up later. You're forcing commitment tied to hard metrics.
Precisely. And finally, this whole section really emphasizes being decisive in closing and in your follow-through. When the preset time limit ends, you have to close decisively. No lingering uncertainty. Any unresolved debates get captured and immediately scheduled for a separate dedicated workshop.
And that follow-through, that's where the boundary really hardens, isn't it? The sources are incredibly strict on speed and transparency.
They are. You should send meeting notes within 30 minutes, emphasizing commitments, who owns them, and the next review checkpoints explicitly. That quick turnaround just cements the decisions before memories can fade or, alternative narratives start to form in the hallway.
And this brings us to the ultimate boundary defense, handling that email pushback. What happens when a dissenting stakeholder tries to quietly reopen the decision in an email the next morning, hoping you'll just give in one-on-one?
You meet that challenge with immediate data-backed finality. The assertive response has to be swift and strategically leveraged. The sources say you reply referencing two things: the decisions that were captured in the notes you just sent,
Right.
and the executive sponsorship that's already been granted for the whole project direction.
And here's the key strategic move. The sources say you reinforce your response by looping in leadership.
Yes. And it's not aggression. It's just scaling the accountability. By CCing the relevant executive sponsor, or maybe even the legal team, you are signaling that this boundary isn't your personal preference. It's tied to a larger signed governance document.
The cost of reopening that decision just increased exponentially for that person.
Hugely. Because now it requires that executive to disrupt a plan they already approved.
That reframes it completely. It's not you challenging them, it's you protecting the project governance. The assertive response becomes a defense mechanism for a collective, data-backed decision. Okay, let's move now to the language of money. This is often where professional boundaries get tested with the most intensity. We're talking about financial accountability, justifying resources, and defending budget decisions with verifiable data.
In the financial sphere, data stops being just a reference tool. It becomes your primary defense and really your only credible negotiating leverage.
So when you're challenging those unfounded assumptions, like a sudden proposal for a 15% budget cut, your opening statement has to be strategically airtight.
It has to be. The source material gives us this brilliant assertive opening. It immediately anchors the whole discussion to high-level compliance. I need to state upfront that we cannot slash budgets without referencing signed forecast adjustments and assessing the associated mandated regulatory risks.
Wow. It just completely dismisses any personal desire for cuts and insists that only corporate documents and regulatory requirements actually matter.
Exactly. So if, for example, a procurement manager argues that market prices for a service have dropped, based on some informal chats at a networking event.
Right, the I heard from a guy argument.
You immediately have to refuse anecdotal data. You request evidence beyond chatter from networking events.
And your counterattack has to be rooted in specific internal verified metrics. You pivot by pointing towards, say, the benchmarking spreadsheet, something that transparently shows your current negotiated rates are already in the target percentile for the industry.
And that move just takes the argument out of the realm of subjective feelings and plants it firmly in verified market performance data that you already control. The power of contractual defense here is immense.
Especially during vendor negotiations or discussions about swapping vendors.
Oh yeah. If the finance team suggests ripping out an established vendor for a cheaper one, you remind everyone that your contracted service credits protect business continuity. They provide liability insurance under the current agreement. You then emphasize that trying to renegotiate now could trigger penalty clauses, which directly undermines the very cash flow planning they're trying to improve.
That is such a critical point. You're framing the boundary setting in this case, sticking with the current, more expensive vendor, as a way of protecting the company's financial health and stability.
Not hindering it.
Yeah.
Yes. And this data-driven approach is absolutely vital when it comes to defending core resource needs, especially headcount. If a finance committee questions the need to replace staff who've left,
Which they always do.
always, you have to stress that attrition replacement is mandatory to maintain service level agreements worldwide. It's a non-negotiable compliance point, not just a staffing preference.
Okay, but how do you back that up with hard data that actually makes the finance team pause and listen?
You use physical evidence. The source material strongly recommends producing the workload heat map. It's a visual that proves your teams are already operating at, say, 90% capacity across your most strategic revenue-generating accounts. You show them that cutting staff isn't saving money.
It's guaranteeing a default.
It's guaranteeing a default on existing signed contracts, which just opens the door to penalties.
So when you walk into a financial presentation armed with that level of data, benchmarks, contracts, heat maps, you can just confidently open with the non-negotiables. You emphasize the compliance obligations, the regulatory watchdog expectations. It just sets the scope of what's possible from the very start.
And if the debate starts to spiral or get heated, which, let's be honest, financial discussions often do, the strategy is to steady the tone and immediately reiterate our fiduciary responsibility toward board directives. This is the ultimate appeal to objective stewardship. It reminds everyone in the room that the goal is long-term value preservation, not just reactive cost cutting.
So instead of a hard, flat no to a budget cut, the assertive professional proposes structured alternatives. It's about being a partner, not a roadblock. Can you give an example of that kind of structured alternative language?
Absolutely. Instead of saying, no, we won't cut, you propose negotiating phase efficiency reviews rather than immediate budget amputations. You might say something like, we understand the pressure for efficiency, so rather than immediate cuts, let's propose 3 quarterly checkpoints, and we'll pair them with measurable efficiency indicators like deployment speed and error rates.
So you move the conversation from this painful, immediate sacrifice to a measurable, transparent improvement over time. You're basically trading immediate discomfort for long-term accountability.
They are. You're moving the discussion from no to yes, but only under these measurable, controlled, data-backed conditions. And if they insist on escalating to an executive, you welcome it. You walk in with all your documented diligence, your rationale, all of it supported by governance and contracts. You make sure leadership hears the full story anchored in risk management, not just departmental wants.
Post-negotiation integrity feels just as vital as the negotiation itself here.
It's critical. You have to ensure crystal clarity by sending a crisp recap with all the attached dashboards, plus the key assumptions that were agreed upon. This just discourages any possibility of, selective storytelling or misinterpretation after the fact.
And if a counterparty tries to find loopholes or keeps pushing back through less formal channels,
You harden the boundary with legal authority. You explicitly reiterate contractual terms, and you CC the legal department for additional reinforcement. This ensures that the professional boundaries you set in the meeting are legally anchored and they're respected in all the follow-up correspondence. You're creating an ironclad paper trail.
what's fascinating here is the complete removal of personal ego from the negotiation.
Totally. Your data, the benchmarking spreadsheet, the service credit clause in the contract, the heat map, that's your co-negotiator. It's impossible to argue with the data without arguing against a signed contract, and that's a battle most stakeholders just are not willing to pick.
Okay, this next section is really the front line of project management. It's the language you need to push back on those unrealistic delivery demands, unwarranted feature creep, and those unauthorized demands on your specialist talent.
This is all about enforcing reality. We're starting with resisting acceleration demands, what's often called delivery compression. It's when partners or stakeholders try to dramatically shorten timelines without changing the scope or, adding any resources.
So the assertive response has to be immediate, and it has to be framed exclusively in terms of mutually agreed upon trade-offs.
Yes, you outline right away that acceleration is not free. You say something like, acceleration of this timeline requires one of 3 explicit trade-offs: incremental budget, overtime authorization, or reducing non-essential features. You give them an and/or choice. It is not a free pass.
And when they inevitably try to use competitive pressure, that classic, well, competitor X can do it faster argument, what's the move?
You have to counter by questioning their claims, not by defending your team's competence. You must ask for specifics on the scope and the quality metrics achieved by that competitor.
And then you counter with your own verified evidence. You use your client satisfaction data showing that stability and consistency matter more to our strategic accounts than some flashy but unstable launch.
Exactly. You pivot the debate away from speed, which is a dangerous game, and towards stability and long-term quality, which is your actual strength.
To anchor the conversation back in hard reality, the project leader needs to present physical evidence.
The source suggests presenting the critical path diagram. It demonstrates the real constraints on integration testing, on vendor certification windows, on mandatory security clearances. You reinforce project stability by walking them through risk probability charts that detail the likelihood of failure if those constraints are violated.
So the documents do the talking. It becomes a risk management conversation, not a scheduling preference. And the primary tool for managing this new pressure is always going to be the formal process, enforcing change control.
If new pressure comes up in the middle of a meeting, you just politely but firmly insist on formal change control procedures. And this is the key. You immediately provide the change form template instantly. The very act of providing the document makes it clear that if you want speed, you have to follow the process. No more informal hallway agreements. You turn an abstract boundary into a concrete, immediate administrative task that the requester has to do.
Okay, so next up is defending against scope creep. This often comes from enthusiastic product marketing teams or clients who are injecting these new, supposedly easy features.
You have to call out scope creep politely, but with mathematical precision. You remind them that every single addition requires documented trade-offs and formal approvals. If they pull the customer's expected card,
Right.
you demand verifiable evidence. The assertive response is to request validated research plus the quantified impact on adoption metrics. Anecdotes are dismissed. Data is required.
And if they then pressure you to just find the resources, you need to justify your capacity hold with visual proof.
Present the capacity charts. Show them your key developers are fully allocated, leaving zero slack for unplanned work right now. That visual evidence just moves the conversation from an argument to an acceptance of reality.
Which leads directly to the essential trade-off strategy.
Yes. When they ask for an exception, you request they prioritize within the existing scope, replacing lesser impact items responsibly. You might say, we can integrate feature Y, but we need to agree right now which existing low-impact feature will be de-scoped to free up the 2 weeks of engineering time it requires.
And to make sure there's accountability for that choice, you immediately facilitate a quick ranking exercise. You document the choices so the accountability for that swap stays transparent.
They have to explicitly document what is being removed so the new feature can be added. That prevents them from coming back later and demanding both.
Finally, let's talk about guarding specialist bandwidth from ad hoc pressure, like being pulled into endless undocumented committees. This feels vital for protecting team morale and focus.
It's so important. You assert control over your resources by sharing a visibility chart that shows their current commitments and utilization rates. And you state respectfully that ad hoc assignments erode focus and they jeopardize deliverable quality. You frame it as a quality defense, not a scheduled defense.
The solution isn't just saying no, it's implementing governance around the intake process itself.
You propose a formal request process. It has to require a justification, the expected outcomes, and an estimate of the time investment required from your specialist. You make the informal request jump through these formal, necessary hoops, which forces the requester to actually value your specialist's time.
And if that doesn't stop the pressure,
Then the assertive professional forces leadership to own the trade-off. You go to leadership and you ask them directly, which of our key deliverables should be slowed down if this mandatory committee participation exceeds 10 hours per week?
so you ensure the trade-offs are explicit, they're visible, and they are owned at the executive level, not by you.
And if team bandwidth shrinks so severely that it's unsustainable, the source material recommends a really powerful final move. Bring HR into the conversation. You reference the company's workload policies that are there to protect employee well-being.
That demonstrates a strategic commitment to sustainable delivery over just short-term heroics. You're protecting the team from burnout, which is a major compliance risk in itself.
All right, this next section is about defending the core structures of the business itself. The governance that protects us, the data integrity that informs us, and the value proposition that sustains us. Lax boundaries here can lead to, audit failures or significant reputational damage.
These are the non-negotiable foundations. We can start with enforcing governance and audit trails, especially when clients or even internal teams try to bypass the established protocol just to speed up a personal agenda.
So when someone tries to skip the official channels, the key assertive phrase immediately redirects authority away from that individual and puts it back on the established corporate structure. Exactly. You say something like, I need to reiterate that authority for sign-off resides with the steering committee, not in informal chat threads or ad hoc calls.
And you have to immediately insist on the process for accountability, framing their bypass as a risk to everyone involved.
Yes, you emphasize that bypassing these controls jeopardizes essential audit trails and exposes both of our teams to serious compliance breaches. That elevates the issue from a simple procedural inconvenience to a serious shared legal risk.
But what if they just keep pushing and the meeting stalls? This is where professional composure is really tested. The sources suggest a pretty extreme but powerful assertion of control.
They do. The strategy is you have to politely pause the meeting until the representatives explicitly agree to follow protocol. You summarize the expectations and you remind everyone, we are the guardians of strategic alignment here, and process is what ensures that alignment. That deliberate pause is a very powerful, non-verbal assertion that integrity is being prioritized over immediate comfort.
You're signaling that the governance structure is a protection mechanism. It's not an obstacle to be avoided. It protects investments and reputations, not just bureaucratic control for its own sake.
Precisely.
Okay, next let's address the critical issue of data discrepancies. When operations reports contradict the official dashboards, it can really erode leadership's confidence.
The immediate reaction has to be to stabilize the narrative. You have to insist on an investigation first.
The assertive move is to insist. We must immediately launch a root cause investigation before presenting any further updates. We need to prevent speculation from eroding confidence in our existing systems.
Yes, you halt the spread of potentially bad information until you have the facts secured. Once the root cause is understood, then transparency is absolutely vital for rebuilding trust. You have to candidly acknowledge the gap and then immediately prepare a formal correction note.
And that note has to highlight 3 things, right?
3 things. The root cause, the immediate fix you implemented, and the preventative measures you put in place to make sure it never happens again.
And to strengthen oversight, you share monitoring enhancements right away, things like automated alerts or peer reviews. And you formally request that operations align on reporting cutoffs to avoid these confusing mid-cycle adjustments that just create more confusion.
And the final, decisive step of assertion here is linking accuracy to an external mandate. You remind any resistant parties, especially those who view reporting as tedious, that data accuracy underpins decision-making and regulatory filings. You can reference specific compliance obligations.
That underscores the non-negotiable nature of data quality. It's not a departmental preference, it's a legal requirement.
It has to be treated that way.
Okay, finally, let's cover the most financially exposed boundary: upholding your pricing and contractual SLAs. This requires an assertive defense of your firm's value proposition against some aggressive budget pressures.
Yeah, when a prospective client proposes rates that are significantly below your established model, you have to acknowledge their budget constraints, but then state clearly that our expertise warrants the established pricing tiers. You have to differentiate your offering immediately. Do not apologize for your price.
And you differentiate not just on features, but on risk mitigation and the outcome. You can do this by highlighting case studies that showcase risk mitigation and accelerated revenue benefits that are not offered by cheaper entry-level alternatives.
You're selling security, predictability, and accelerated outcomes, not just hourly input.
What if the client makes unrealistic SLA demands, like demanding an overnight turnaround on some complex regulatory analysis?
You have to express empathy for their timeline, but then assert that the agreed-upon timeline protects accuracy and compliance obligations. You highlight the systemic risk of errors when analysts are rushed, and you state that the standard timeline is mandated to maintain your quality thresholds.
So you reframe the timeline as a quality safeguard. But if the client absolutely requires acceleration, the assertive professional offers a structured, cost-justified alternative.
Yes. You suggest a premium service tier with dedicated resources. You outline the pricing structure, the staffing requirements, and the explicit notice periods needed to activate that option. This shows flexibility while firmly protecting your standard service levels and margins.
You turn a no into a conditional, profitable yes?
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the entire philosophy of assertive professionalism in action. You never just say no. You always respond with, yes, we can achieve that, but only under these documented, resource-backed, governance-compliant conditions. That preserves the relationship, but it enforces the boundaries you need for quality and for long-term viability.
So we've covered meeting structure, financial defense, operational boundaries, and value protection. Let's try to synthesize the overall assertive approach now and look at how this specific language reinforces an organization's culture and its momentum.
The foundational element really is the assertive tone itself. It's achieving that blend of respectfulness with an unwavering conviction. This is the difference between being a good manager and being a trusted leader.
That unwavering nature, it demonstrates that firmness is what anchors trust in our stewardship.
It does. People trust leaders who are clear about reality, even when that reality is inconvenient or, disappointing.
A key repeated strategy across all of these scenarios, from vendor negotiation to scope defense, is the power of documentation and just getting it out there quickly. We saw the importance of documenting commitments, circulating summaries within 30 minutes, and referencing existing external records.
Exactly. Referencing those existing records like the signed roadmap, the contractual terms, or the board minutes, that is the best defense against post-meeting pushback. When someone tries to challenge you, you don't respond with a rebuttal. You respond by directing them to the signed legal document. You turn meeting minutes and contracts into this protective, shared shield of accountability.
Let's focus for a minute on phrases that are specifically designed for team protection and resilience. Teams often absorb a lot of external pressure, which can really damage morale. So if a vendor or a client tries to imply that a mistake was your team's fault, how do you handle that assertively but, gently?
You have to confront that implication gently but immediately. You state the facts chronologically to show precisely where the accountability actually belongs.
Can you give an example?
Sure. I recognize the frustration on the deployment timeline. However, my documentation confirms that the required data package from your team was delivered 72 hours past the agreed-upon cutoff, which then necessitated a delay in our internal testing window. It's critical for protecting morale and professional reputation. You're just sticking strictly to the shared timeline of facts.
And when you're defending quality standards against internal pressure to cut corners, the language, again, has to be externalized.
It does. You reference the client clauses that mandate adherence to premium standards, and you remind stakeholders that service credits apply when quality dips below X threshold. This frames holding the line as mandatory due to external contracts, not your own internal stubbornness.
So the ultimate responsibility of the leader in this kind of environment is just modeling the behavior.
It's all about modeling. The commitment has to be to model calm confidence in every single meeting. When the leader is visibly firm, calm, and reliant on data, the team feels safe enough to adopt that same level of courageous honesty. It reinforces that courageous honesty is the cornerstone of professional partnerships.
Finally, let's touch on executive steering the high-stakes close. When you're preparing updates for the highest level of leadership, you have to encourage a confident tone, highlighting decisive progress and outstanding commitments clearly.
Ambiguity is so costly to an executive. They value efficiency and certainty above almost everything else.
And when someone on your staff asks for softer language when delivering bad news to the executive suite,
the assertive leader explains that clarity prevents misinterpretation, and it actually builds deeper trust. You've explained to them that executives appreciate direct updates when the stakes are high, because, at that level, ambiguity is interpreted as unmanaged risk. Your assertion is a form of competent risk management. You're protecting them from the danger of vague updates that mask how severe a problem really is.
So what does this all mean?
The core lesson here is that assertive professionalism isn't a personal trait. It's a communication system, and it's rooted in clarity plus decisive follow-through. Every single firm statement you make has to be immediately traceable to external data, a dashboard, a signed contract, a documented risk log. That data serves as your completely objective co-negotiator.
And the payoff for adopting this consistent approach is massive. Standing firm protects quality, it prevents the scope creep that leads to team burnout, and ultimately it ensures clients get the predictable, high-value outcomes they actually purchased, all within the agreed-upon constraints.
Exactly. Consistent, data-backed boundaries empower everyone involved to focus on delivering measurable value instead of just firefighting surprises and having endless internal debates.
And the discussion really highlighted not just what to say, but the structural reinforcement you need, the commitment to creating toolkits, coaching circles to embed these skills.
So you have to consider what structures you can put in place right now. Maybe it's a simple decision register for every meeting, or making that change control form mandatory, or creating a clear resource intake form. Anything to make your assertive business language not just a reaction to pressure, but a predictable, respected, and professional process.
That is exactly the strategic guidance we needed. Thank you for guiding us through this powerful strategic playbook. Now go apply these phrases confidently. We'll be here next time for your next deep dive.